Since your tummy is empty after giving birth, you should be able to do the housework, right? When I returned home after giving birth to triplets, I found out our home had turned into a hole. My husband believed that I had been neglecting house chores using pregnancy as an excuse. He said now that I had given birth, I had no reason to slack off. Seeing me struggle with chores in my frail state, he declared, "I'll call my mother. She'll teach you how you should be as a housewife." My mother-in-law is notoriously strict, and to be honest, I've always found her difficult to deal with. Soon after his phone call, she came around with a furious look on her face. But what happened was something I could have never imagined. I lost my parents when I was young, and I was raised by my grandmother, but she passed away before I graduated from high school. With the help of kind neighbors, I managed to graduate high school. I found a job right after graduation and left my hometown. I had no choice but to sell my grandmother's house, so I no longer have a home to go back to. Fortunately, the people I worked with were very nice to me, and I met someone who I wanted to be married to. When I visited his parents for the first time to announce our marriage, I felt scared by just looking at his mother's strict face. My husband didn't plan to live with his parents, so we started our married life just the two of us. He was a very dependable husband, and though I handled most of the housework, his words with appreciation made me happy. My husband would tell me how good my cooking was, and that alone was enough to make me happy in our marriage. Around our 6-month anniversary, we found out that I was pregnant with triplets. The odds of naturally conceiving triplets are about 1 in 700,000. Since it was my first pregnancy, and I had no parents to rely on, I took maternity leave early. I had a strange feeling of happiness mixed with a little fear as my body was changing. A female colleague of my husband, who had been kind to me since we started dating, had gone on maternity leave a few months earlier. She had worked almost until she gave birth, which I found incredibly powerful compared to my situation. I told her that I felt pregnant for the first time and expressed my fears and worries to her. She reassured me, saying everyone's nervous the first time. Her words kept me going as my little babies grew inside me. But my husband didn't see it that way. He accused me of slacking off whenever he noticed the slightest lapse in household chores. I wasn't intentionally cutting corners. Despite my complaints of nausea, heartburn, and fatigue, which I had never experienced before, he dismissed them as my imagination. "I'm out working for the family, and you want me to do the housework you neglected. You do nothing but lie around all day, enjoying 3 meals and naps. How lazy you are." To him, housework wasn't a job. It was a woman's duty. Sure, I did most of the housework before I got pregnant, but he always helped me a little when I asked. When I pointed this out to him, he replied, "Housework is a woman's duty. Of course, you should do 99.9% of it, since I'm the one who earns the money. 0.1% of my help is more than enough." I then realized that there was no point in arguing anymore. I gave up and tried to meet his demands while sneaking in some rest. A few months had passed, perhaps because of this stress. I was hospitalized for a possible premature labor. The triplets were still too small, and an early birth would decrease their chances of survival. So, I was ordered to complete bed rest. I told my husband on the phone, and then he did come after his shift. "But staying in the hospital, you're not even due yet. You asked the doctor to stay in the hospital so you can avoid housework, didn't you?" He accused. Didn't he hear from the doctor? I was shocked. I had called him because the doctor wanted to explain the situation to both of us and asked him to come as soon as possible. "Who's going to cook for me while you're here? You managed to come here for doctor's appointments so far, right? You'll be fine. Let's go home." He started packing my stuff and tried to drag me out of the bed. "Do you know how much it will cost to stay here? I have no intention of paying medical bills for someone who's not even sick. A C-section childbirth should be natural. Don't do anything that deviates from the laws of nature. Shame on you." His mention of a C-section showed that he had at least heard the explanation, but he clearly had not understood any of it. It was too early to give birth. The babies had to grow inside me. Hospitalization wasn't just a choice, It was a necessity. Besides having triplets, a C-section had been the plan from the beginning. I would have preferred a natural birth if it weren't for the triplets. But my husband, who hadn't helped me with anything at all, was full of disdain. "You just got me pregnant, and now you abandoned me." My anger against him was building up. If it were just about me, I can bear it, but 3 new precious lives were growing inside me. I'd do anything to protect them. But no matter how I tried to explain, my husband wouldn't listen. And from the anger, I started struggling to breathe. That's when a midwife rushed into the room. My husband was kicked out of the room, and I could hear him getting scolded. This was a matter of life and death, and his behavior was dangerously close to being reportable. Other pregnant women were so disturbed by him. They complained to him. After that, he behaved himself in the hospital. With one problem less, I thought I could focus on the babies. But I had to have a C-section soon, even though it was a little early for them. My biggest concern was whether they would be born healthy. But to my relief, the triplets were strong and healthy, happy babies. However, because they were born prematurely, they needed to stay in the hospital for a while. Even though my stay was longer compared to natural birth, I was discharged before my babies. When I got home, still feeling weak, I found out that the house had turned into a hole. "You're the one who got away from housework for such a long time, so it's not my fault. But since you're back home now, hurry up, clean the house, and cook something for me." It was obvious that while I was in the hospital, he hadn't done anything around the house at all. Instead of washing clothes, he seemed to have just bought new ones and piled them up. I could tell if he was ordering food or buying takeout every night by the dirty food boxes or containers of rotten leftovers all over the place. The awful smell was undoubtedly from all this mess. There was no way I could clean up all this mess in a day or two, and I stood there stunned. "You slimmed down around the belly. Should be easier to move around, right? So don't just stand there and get to work." He never visited me when I was hospitalized and didn't even come to pick me up. I was foolish enough to have a little hope that he might welcome me back home. In reality, I should never have expected anything from him. I was still not in the best condition after the delivery, yet I started cleaning up little by little, taking breaks in between. But whenever I was resting, he would find me and say, "Don't slack off, get up, and start cooking. Don't you understand that I should be the priority?" No matter how I tried to explain my situation, he just saw it as an excuse to slack off. I also had to visit the triplets in the hospital and pump milk. I couldn't just clean all the time. He demanded home-cooked meals, but the kitchen was filthy with a pile of garbage. I didn't think it was a good idea to prepare food in such condition, so I resorted to buying pre-cooked meals. I managed to go shopping, but I wasn't recovered enough to cook from scratch. So picking different pre-cooked meals each day was all I could manage. The regret of not being able to carry the triplets to full term haunted me, keeping me awake at night. I think that too contributed to my slow recovery. I begged my husband to take it easy on me, warning him that at this rate, I might end up back in the hospital, but in a different way. But he sternly refused, saying, "I won't accept any more hospital stays just because you want to avoid housework." I continued to sneak in breaks while doing chores. Eventually, I reached my limit and fell asleep without noticing his return. Sleeping instead of greeting me when I returned from work. What a life you have. Do you realize who you owe your livelihood to? You need to be re-educated as a wife. I'll tell my mother about your laziness and have her set you straight. He said that and called his mother right in front of me. He told her, "I checked myself into the hospital just to avoid housework and to try to slack off using postpartum as an excuse." He would say his mother was strict with discipline. The memories of her scolding him as a child were still vivid in his mind. I had found her intimidating since the first time I met her. She had always seemed stern and hard to approach. I was terrified that it was my turn to receive strict discipline from my mother-in-law. She was supposed to come the next day, but on the day my husband rushed out of the house to avoid her, using some work-related meeting as an excuse. Right after he left the house, there she was arriving with a fierce look on her face. I braced myself for a scolding before I could even greet her. "What are you doing?" she said. I thought, here comes the criticism for my cleaning. "You should be resting after risking your life for giving birth." She took the vacuum cleaner from me, put on her apron, then started to clean. She questioned me if I've been able to have enough rest in a clean bed, and then decided which room to clean first. Once one of the rooms was clean, she told me to rest there. I wondered if it was okay, but my body was already screaming its limits. Intending to rest only briefly, I ended up resting deeply. I woke up and rushed out of the room to look for my meal and found that she had not only taken care of the piled-up laundry, but also prepared a warm meal. Though there were still rooms that needed to be cleaned, the house was transformed into a livable space. I couldn't be more grateful for what she had done all by herself. Then my husband came home. Seeing the living room and entrance cleaned, he was triumphantly convinced that his judgment was right. My mom really did a good job teaching my lazy wife a lesson. "I guess I've been too lenient with my wife. I'll learn from you and start being strict with her," he explained. He saw the warm and appetizing meal. He started eating by himself. Suddenly, my Mill snatched the meal from him and took the fork out of his hand. "Who said you could eat? Get down on the floor," she commanded with an undeniable force, making my husband jump out of his chair and kneel on the floor. She asked him what the hell he had done to his own wife. She said to him, "Childbirth is a life-threatening event, and you, instead of caring for your wife who went through it, made her do household chores. I did not raise such a worthless son. How on earth could you think she stayed in the hospital just to escape housework? You disregard the value of life too much, like a monster wearing human skin. Don't you know what a C-section is? It's surgery where the abdomen is cut open. How dare you leave the house so dirty and do nothing about it while your wife needed to rest in a clean environment? You are the one in need of discipline, not your wife, you useless bust." The scene was unbelievable, like a grown man being scolded like a child. You never change, do you? You take the opinions of others at face value, and when corrected, you become stubborn and refuse to listen. Your father now acts more responsibly, you foolish son, she continued. She questioned him why he mistreated his postpartum wife, and my husband confessed. He was influenced by a male colleague. He was told that women use pregnancy as a weapon to become bold and impudent. Pregnant women slack off on household chores using morning sickness as an excuse and opt for easy childbirth using the baby as a reason. They would conveniently control the men because the men don't know any better. She was infuriated to find out that her son believed such an absurd story, and he had been oppressing me. I was worried that her blood pressure would rise so high and cause a stroke. He was unable to retort, just shriveled up. My Mill had offered to help with postpartum care, but my husband declined, saying he would take care of me, which she initially admired as his growth. However, the reality was the opposite, and she apologized to me for not visiting, having trusted her words. I felt touched knowing she had been so concerned about me. My Mill was strict but very sensible. She said that anyone who spreads falsehoods is no good colleague at all. She told him off not to believe such people. He optimistically said, as for that colleague, he was away on a business trip for a while, so there was no need to worry about it anymore. I doubted whether he truly understood, and my Mill seemed to share my skepticism. She was looking down at him doubtfully. After this incident, my husband became more cooperative, and my health improved. Eventually, I was able to manage grocery shopping after visiting the triplets at the hospital. My Mill still regularly came over to help and left pre-cooked meals that could be stored for later. I felt so grateful for her kindness. When the triplets came home from the hospital, she visited almost every day, reminding my husband of the importance of family. Initially, he refused to change diapers, but fearing my Mill's wrath, he reluctantly started helping. He would attentively care for the children in her presence, but once she left, he would cease doing anything. His attitude became apparent even without her watching, leading him to busily search the house for hidden cameras. It was obvious to her anyway by just watching him changing diapers. However, The once tiny triplets grew up fast. Eventually, my husband gave in and only helped with diapers and feeding. Until the triplets started one for nighttime crying. He claimed he had work the next day, used earplugs, and went to sleep. This left me feeling like being a single mom. Then one day, he casually remarked, "The triplets are 1 year old now. You can handle them alone, right? The hardest part is still to come." Had he been influenced again by that same colleague? Upon further conversation, he mentioned that his female colleague who had returned from maternity leave said childcare became easier once the child turned 1. It was the same colleague who had encouraged me during my anxious first pregnancy. Would you really say something so careless? So now that you've been slacking on housework for so long, time to go full throttle. Childcare and housework are women's jobs, not for men. By the way, when are you going back to work? I didn't plan to have 3 babies. I can't feed them by myself. With these words, I was certain the colleague who had been away on business had returned and filled my husband's head with more falsehoods. He would leave his clothes around and never clean up after meals. He seemed to have regressed to the days when he expected everything to be done for him. Bath, meals, tea, with 3 toddlers moving around. I couldn't manage all the housework. I claimed that if he wanted the housework done, he needed to participate in childcare. But as I expected, he labeled it as an excuse for slacking. Moreover, his lack of interest in the children, he often left dangerous items like razors within their reach. When I pointed it out, he would scoff, saying, "I used to handle it before pregnancy." He even insisted that the one who notices should put away. This led to arguments, and in his frustration, he started ignoring me and the children. He would step over them as they lay on the floor. He couldn't have stepped on them if they made little movement. I told him to be more careful with them, but he ignored. Because I protected the children and told him off, he became even more stubborn and sulky. I gave up, and I consulted my mill. The next morning, she came over, woke up my still sleeping husband, and took him back to her place. A few days later, they returned, and my husband looked drained. I could tell he had undergone intense re-education. He kneeled before me, half crying, apologizing. He looked quite shocked and exhausted from being scolded and beaten back by his mother. The shock seemed to stem mainly from being lectured at work about his complaints. Angry at being scolded by his mother, he had vented at the office about what a terrible wife I was. The recently returned female colleague, hearing his complaints, asked, "Triplets?" When my husband nodded, she erupted in fury. I said child care gets a bit easier at 1 year old for 1 child, not triplets. How can you leave your wife alone with 3 babies? What kind of father are you? She told him off. Even the other men in the office were astonished. It's a miracle she hasn't divorced you yet. The issue escalated, and his boss also reprimanded him severely. Rumors had spread that he was abusive towards me and the children. At the same time, the male colleague who had misled him was being fired for inappropriate behavior towards female colleagues. He had claimed to be on a business trip, but it was just a cover for dealing with his divorce. Upon returning, he was faced with a complaint filed against him, leading to police involvement. My husband, realizing the gravity of the situation after his boss declared an investigation into these rumors, finally felt a sense of crisis. His mother also warned him that if he was abandoned by his wife, she too would forsake him. Her stern words questioning his urge to push me back to work and his failure to support the family alone when he claimed to be the head made him change. I was wrong. I'll change and devote myself to my wife and children. Please don't leave me, he begged. My mill told me to tell him anything freely, but I decided to forgive him just this once. However, I made it clear one more slip, and I wouldn't forgive him. Since then, he has changed, actively engaging in housework and childcare. He even bought cooking books for simple men's recipes, and cooking on the weekends became his routine. Occasionally, my mill would drop by and announce to play with the children, and it was a huge help. By the time the triplets were old enough to go to daycare, he had learned to care for them well enough that I felt comfortable working part-time. I had to give up my full-time job to take care of my triplets. However, I plan to increase my hours and hopefully return to full-time work once they start school. If it weren't for my Mill's help, we would never be able to continue as a family. I am immensely grateful for her support and hope to repay her kindness in time. Growing up, it was always clear to me that I stood apart from the rest of my family. My name is Jenny, and I hail from a lineage of restaurant owners. My father, Joe, is a commanding figure, overseeing our family restaurant with a strict hand. My mother, Linda, is his impeccable partner, constantly engrossed in managing the staff. Then there's my older brother, Mike, the golden boy groomed to inherit the family business. I recall a night at the dinner table, the air saturated with the savory scent of Dad's renowned roast. Mom enthusiastically shared details about a new recipe they were experimenting with. "Jenny, you'll love this one. It has that fancy herb you adore. What's it called again?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "Thyme," I mumbled, idly picking at my food. Mike, mouthful, laughed dismissively from across the table. "Who cares about some dumb herb? Wait till you see the new grill Dad's getting for the restaurant. That's the real deal." Dad nodded, his gaze fixed on me. "Speaking of the restaurant, Jenny, when are you going to start taking an interest?" "You're not getting any younger." Attempting to make myself inconspicuous in my chair, I responded, "When I'm Dad. I like being outside with the plants and stuff." Mom sighed, exchanging a glance with Dad. "Plants? What are you going to do with plants? You need a real job, Jenny, something to fall back on." A knot tightened in my stomach. It was the same conversation every time, but Grandma Rose understood. She lived in a small house surrounded by a breathtaking garden on the outskirts of town. Grandma Rose was different from my parents, gentle and patient. One day, as I found her in the garden, hands immersed in the soil, she smiled brightly. "Jenny, dear, come help me plant these tulips." Sitting beside her, feeling the cool dirt on my hands, I confided, "Grandma, why don't Mom and Dad understand? I love being here with the plants." Grandma Rose wiped her brow, looking at me with wise eyes. "Your parents just want what's best for you, Jenny, but they don't see the world the same way we do. There's magic in these plants in the earth. It's okay to be different." I clung to Grandma Rose's words, even as the pressure from my family intensified. High school graduation marked a crossroads. The house buzzed with excitement over Mike's plans to join Dad at the restaurant. Amidst it all, I felt like a spectator in my own life. One evening, as we gathered in the living room, Dad spoke passionately about expanding the restaurant, eyes gleaming with ambition. Mom turned to me, her voice sharp. "And what about you, Jenny? Ready to step up, handle the front desk, learn the ropes?" Taking a deep breath, I mustered the courage to speak my truth. "Actually, I'm not going to work at the restaurant. I'm going to study landscape design." The room fell silent. Dad's face turned red, and he barked. "Landscape what now? That's no career for you. You're a part of this family, and the restaurant is our legacy." Mike sneered. "What are you going to do? Plant flowers for a living?" My cheeks burned, but I held my ground. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm good at it, and I love it." Mom's expression wavered between confusion and concern. "Jenny, be sensible. You can't make a living off playing in the dirt." I rose to my feet, a surge of defiance coursing through me. "It's not just playing in the dirt, Mom. It's creating something beautiful, something real. I'm not asking for your approval, but I am telling you, this is my decision." Dad slammed his hand on the table, his voice booming. "If you choose this foolishness, you're on your own. Don't expect any help from us." A knot tightened in my stomach, but my voice remained steady. "Fine, I'll do it on my own." Grandma Rose, who had been quietly knitting in the corner, finally spoke. Her voice was calm but carried weight. "Joe, let the girl follow her heart. She's got a gift, and it would be a sin to waste it." Her eyes fixed on Dad. Dad let out a frustrated grunt, turning away. "Fine, do what you want, but don't come crying to us when it all falls apart." I turned to leave the room, my heart pounding. Mike called out after me, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Good luck, gardener." Let's see how far those flowers get you. Stepping into college life felt like diving into deep water, thrilling yet daunting. I, Jenny, was far from the familiar paths of my family's expectations, ready to carve my own way in the world of landscape design. I still remember the buzz of the first day in class, the room swirling with the energy of eager students. I found a spot in the back, trying to shrink into the shadows. That's when Zoe, a girl with fire engine red hair and eyes full of mischief, dropped into the seat next to me. "Hey there, Nudie. I'm Zoe, a first-timer in landscape design." I gave a shy nod. "Yeah, I'm Jenny. It's all a bit overwhelming." Zoe's laugh was loud and genuine. "You'll fit right in. Wait till you get your hands into the real dirt. It's epic. What dragged you into this world?" I hesitated, the disapproval of my family still fresh. "I've always loved plants, the outdoors. It's where I feel right, you know." Her grin widened. "Perfect place for you then." Classes were a whirlwind of learning and creating. I absorbed things like a sponge, from the science of soils to the art of design. I was finally speaking a language I loved. After one particularly intense session, Mr. Davidson, our professor, a man as tall and sturdy as an oak, called me over. "Jenny, your designs, there's something else. You've got a real knack for this." His voice was serious but encouraging. I was stunned. "Really? Thank you, Mr. Davidson. I'm just trying to do my best." He leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "There's potential in you. Don't let it go to waste. Push harder." His words became my mantra. I started to live in the studio, my designs becoming more ambitious, more expressive. It was exhausting but exhilarating. But even in those moments of joy, a part of me yearned for my family. Despite everything, one quiet evening, I gathered the courage to call home. The phone rang, each tone heavy with anticipation. Finally, Mom's voice came through, sharp like a knife's edge. "What? What do you want, Jenny?" Her tone stung, but I pushed on. "I just wanted to check in, see how everyone is." She snorted, her voice dripping with scorn. "Oh, now you care, after running off to play in the dirt, abandoning your own family." I gritted my teeth, struggling to maintain a steady voice. "I didn't abandon anyone, Mom. I just chose a different path." Her laugh was bitter. "A dead-end path, you mean? Don't expect us to be here waiting when it all crumbles around you." The call ended, leaving a sour taste in my mouth. However, it also ignited a fire within me. I dove back into my work with renewed determination, intent on proving not only to my family but to myself that I was on the right path. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and mine came in the form of a phone call during my final year of college. It was Aunt Clara, my mom's sister, her voice shaky and strained. "Jenny, it's about your Grandma Rose. She passed away last night." Aunt Clara's voice cracked with emotion, and I felt the ground slip away beneath me. Grandma Rose had been my rock, the one person who believed in my dreams. Losing her felt like losing a part of myself. The funeral was a somber affair, my family stiff and formal. Dad, Mom, and Mike looked like strangers to me. After the service, I'd overheard Mom talking to Aunt Clara. "I still can't believe she left that house to Jenny. What's she going to do with it? She can barely take care of herself." Mom's voice dripped with disapproval. I felt a surge of anger but bit my tongue, avoiding a confrontation. The will reading was a few days later. Grandma Rose had left me her house, the beautiful garden haven where I had spent countless hours. My family was shocked, their whispers sharp as thorns. "Why would she leave it to Jenny? She's never around anyway," Mike muttered under his breath. Dad's face was like thunder. "This is ridiculous. That house could have been sold, put money into the restaurant." I stood up, my voice steady but firm. "Grandma knew I loved that house, that garden. It was where we spent so much time together. I'm going to keep it, just as she wanted." Mom's response was cold and harsh. "So you're just going to live there alone, playing in the dirt? What a waste." Their words stung, but I had made up my mind. I moved into Grandma's house, immersing myself in the garden she had loved so dearly. I started renovating the place, pouring my heart into every plant, every flower bed. As the months passed, I transformed Grandma's garden into something truly special. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could be myself away from the judgment and expectations of my family. The day the invitation to Mike's wedding arrived at my doorstep was a day of mixed feelings. It was a fancy piece of paper with golden letters against a white background, representing a part of my life I had left behind. Staring at it, a storm of emotions churned inside me. I decided to go, but on my terms. I dressed in a way that felt true to me, elegant but simple, a far cry from the dirt-stained clothes they remembered. Entering the restaurant, the sights and sounds of my past life engulfed me. I spotted my family across the room, Mom, Dad, and Mike, all decked out, looking like a picture-perfect family. Bracing myself, I walked over. "Jenny, I didn't think you'd accept the invitation." Mom's voice was sharp, cutting through the noise. "I came to see Mike get married." "It's a family event, isn't it?" I replied, trying to keep my voice level. Mike glanced at me, his smirk familiar and unwelcome. "What's the matter? Ran out of bushes to trim? Decided to play dress up for a change." I felt a familiar sting, but I brushed it off. "I'm just here to wish well, Mike." It was then that his bride, a tall woman with a haughty look, chimed in. "Oh, this is the infamous gardener sister. Did you manage to scrub the dirt from under your nails, dear, or is it your natural look?" Her words, sharp and mocking, hung in the air. I clenched my jaw, refusing to let her see how deep they cut. "I clean up just fine, thanks for asking." "Congratulations to you both." Dad's eyes were cold, his voice colder. "Your being here doesn't erase the past, Jenny. You chose your path." Their words were like thorns, but I had grown a thick skin. "I'm not here to rehash old arguments, just wanted to wish Mike a happy married life." I was quickly ushered to a small table in the corner, away from the family. Sitting there, I could feel the curious stares and hushed whispers. "That's the gardener," they whispered, "the black sheep of the family." But as I sat there, a sense of pride welled up in me. Yes, I was the gardener, the one who had dared to follow her own path. I was no longer the shy, unsure girl they remembered, but a woman who had found her strength, who had bloomed in spite of them. My discomfort only grew as the evening stretched on. Sipping my drink, I tried to make myself invisible. But that plan fell apart when I caught the eye of some guys I knew from childhood. Mike's friends, the same ones who used to join him in mocking me. "Look who's here, the family's little dirt digger," one of them, Jake, sneered as they approached, a smirk plastered on his face. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Actually, it's a landscape designer, but I wouldn't expect you to understand the difference." Their laughter was harsh, grating. "Oh, listen to her. Thinks she's all high and mighty now," Chris added with a scoff. I bit back a sharp retort, my hands clenching under the table. I worked hard for my success. My job is more than just playing in the dirt. Their amusement was cut short when an elderly man at the next table interjected. He had been listening, his expression growing increasingly disapproving. "I've seen this young lady's work, the new park downtown. That's hers. It's outstanding, shows what you know." The group was visibly taken aback, their smugness faltering. Muttering under their breath, they slunk away, their egos bruised. Emboldened, I decided to venture out from my safe corner, mingling through the crowd, dodging glances and whispers. That's when I overheard Mike speaking to a group of his friends. "She's always been the odd one, more into her plants than real work," Mike said, his voice laced with a mix of amusement and disdain. His friend laughed loudly. "Every family's got its black sheep, huh?" Their words were like a slap, raw and stinging. I walked away, my heart pounding, reminding myself their opinions didn't define me. As I weaved through the crowd, I bumped into my cousin Lucy, a quiet presence in our loud family. "Hey, Jenny, I've seen some of your designs. They're really something," she said, her voice sincere. I managed a small smile. "Thanks, Lucy. It means a lot, especially today." Lucy looked at me, her eyes understanding. "I never agreed with how they treated you. You're doing amazing things. I'm glad you stuck to your path." Her words were a small comfort amidst the thorns of the evening. We chatted briefly, a momentary respite from the tension. As Lucy drifted away, I returned to my corner, feeling the weight of the evening. The loud music, clinking glasses, and bursts of laughter around me felt like they were happening in a different world. I sat there, sipping my drink, longing for the celebration to end. The wedding night was winding down, its fancy aura overshadowed by my own tangled feelings. Just when I thought the night couldn't get any more surreal, the mayor, a distant relative of Mike's bride, took the stage for his speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's a delight to be here," he began, his voice booming across the room. "But tonight, I want to highlight a special guest among us, a true star in the world of landscape design, Jenny." Hearing my name, I nearly choked on my drink. I stood up hesitantly, feeling like a deer caught in headlights. The mayor beamed at me. "Jenny here is the brilliant mind behind the transformation of our city park. She's a celebrated landscape designer who's won multiple awards for her incredible work. Let's give her the recognition she deserves." The room erupted into applause, a sound that felt foreign to me. I glanced at my family's table and saw their faces, a mix of shock and embarrassment. Mike's bride leaned towards him, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Is he talking about your sister, the gardener?" Mike mumbled something, looking like he wished the floor would swallow him up. The mayor's praise continued. "Jenny's work has revitalized our city. She's a true talent." Amidst the clapping, I felt a surge of confidence. The mayor's words were like a light, dispelling the shadows of doubt and scorn from my family. Seizing the moment, I decided to speak up. "Thank you, Mayor, for your kind words. It's an honor to contribute to our city's beauty." I paused, my gaze sweeping over the crowd, settling on my family. It's funny, isn't it? How life turns out. Mike, you and your bride are perfect for each other. Your shared talent for rudeness to others is quite remarkable. The room went silent, the air thick with tension. My parents, my brother, and his fiancée blushed deep red, their shame as visible as if I'd slapped them. Mom's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a knife. "Jenny, what are you saying? This is your brother's wedding." I met her gaze unflinching. "Just speaking the truth, Mom, something our family seems to struggle with." Mike stood up, his face red with anger. "You can't come here and talk to us like that." I held my ground, my voice steady. "I've earned my right to speak, Mike. Maybe it's time you all listened." The confrontation ended with Mike sitting down defeated, and the room slowly buzzing back to life. The mayor gave me a nod of respect before moving on. As I sat back down, the weight of the night lifted slightly. I had spoken my piece, stood up for myself in a way I never had before. I was no longer just the gardener or the outcast. I was Jenny, a recognized landscape designer, someone who had grown past her family's narrow expectations. After Mike's wedding, word got out about my success as a landscape designer. People were buzzing about the awards I'd won and the projects I'd aced. It felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in the shadows. And then my family came calling. One afternoon, while I was busy sketching out a new garden design, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice had a sweetness to it that felt out of place. "Jenny, darling, we've been hearing so much about your work. Your father and I are so proud of you." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's a change of tune." There was a pause on the line. "Well, we were thinking maybe you could come over. We'd love to see you, catch up on things." I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Catch up or catch onto my bank account? I shot back, "Mom, that's not fair. We're family." The word family hit a nerve. Family like when you all but disown me for following my dreams. It seems like family matters when there's money in the picture. Before she could respond, I ended the call. I wasn't about to let them back into my life just because they smelled success. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. Mike was standing there, hands in his pockets, looking everywhere but at me. "Hey, Jenny, can we talk?" he mumbled. I crossed my arms. This should be good. "What do you want, Mike?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know we haven't been great, but you're doing well. I was wondering if you could, help me out a bit." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Help you out after years of calling me the gardener and laughing at my ambitions? Mike's face reddened. I didn't mean it like that. It's just that things are tough. I cut him off. Save it, Mike. I'm not your ATM. You and the family made it clear how you felt about me. You can't just waltz back into my life when it's convenient. He opened his mouth to argue, but I stopped him. No, Mike. You made your bed. Now lie in it. After he left, I sat in my garden surrounded by the beauty I had created. My phone rang a few more times over the next week, more attempts at reconciliation from my family. But I didn't answer. I was done with their fair-weather affection. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't need their validation or their greed. I was thriving in my own right, and that was all that mattered. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. As I looked around at the plants and flowers that were a testament to my hard work and passion, I realized I had everything I needed right here. I was happy, successful, and free from the toxic ties that had once bound me. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a whole new book, my book. And I was going to make sure it was a bestseller, written on my own terms, in my own style. The new growth in my life was just starting, and I was ready for whatever came next.